Welcome back to part 2 of Phenomenasons. Today we're jumping straight into our first story, the Perron family haunting, otherwise known as the story that inspired the first Conjuring movie, and the story that kinda inspired me to make this series, because if you're gonna lie about all of this shit, at least create fictional characters. But they didn't do that. In this story, a real person was vilified, and because of this movie, her grave has been constantly vandalized. Because, paranormal investigation is such an innocent hobby, apparently. Anyway, all of this bullshit can be found on the Warrens' website under Case Files, the Perron Family Haunting. Now, according to them, in January 1971, Carolyn and Roger Perron, along with their 5 daughters, moved into this 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. According to Andrea Perron, who wrote a 3-volume book series on this haunting, and would have been about 12 years old at the time the hauntings began, said that almost immediately after the family moved into this farmhouse, a few members of the family began to notice strange occurrences. For example, a broom would disappear and reappear. They would hear weird noises like something scraping against the kettle in the kitchen when no one was in there, piles of dirt would suddenly appear on the clean floor, and cables would mysteriously tangle during the night. The usual shit that happens in every home, even the non-haunted ones. But fair enough, it creeped them out. Soon though, the paranormal stuff escalated. And the next thing they know, they're smelling nasty, rotten smells. And they're seeing full-body apparitions like they're at fucking Hogwarts or something.
Hello! How are you?
Now, they did say that most of these ghosts were harmless, like all ghosts, but they did say that a few of them were angry. According to my research, angry ghosts are also pretty harmless. Find me one real story of a poltergeist throwing a knife into somebody's fucking head. Good luck with that. Now, after the paranormal activity started to escalate, Carolyn researched the history of the farmhouse, and she spoke to a local historian named Mackiachin. I don't know, here's the name on the screen. A person, by the way, no one has ever been able to find or verify that he even existed. But this guy allegedly told Carolyn about an evil presence haunting her property. And this evil presence was a satanic child killer named Bathsheba Sherman. Now, Carolyn also learned that this house had been in Bathsheba's family for 8 generations, and that many of her ancestors had died under mysterious or horrible circumstances. Here are the only 3 examples of the horrible deaths that I could find. Several children drowned in a nearby creek. One of the children was murdered, and a few of the children hanged themselves in the attic. How true is that? It's not true at all. However, according to Andrea Perron, the family experienced other spirits as well that smelled like rotting flesh, and they would cause beds to rise off the floor. She claims that her father would enter the basement and feel a cold, stinking presence behind him. They tried to stay away from the dirt-floored cellar, but the heating equipment would often fail mysteriously, forcing Roger to have to go down there. Now again, at this point, these ghosts didn't really seem harmful, but then Carolyn started waking up with bruises. According to Andrea Perron, quote, "Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position," end quote. So what you're saying is that Bathsheba Sherman was beating up Carolyn Perron in the middle of the night.
Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16.
Well, Bathsheba
3:16 says I just whipped your ass.
So Carolyn decided to call Bathsheba 3:16. So Carolyn decided to call in some paranormal investigators, and they eventually got in contact with the Warrens. Now, after spending some time with the Perron family, the Warrens deduced that they were haunted by a witch named Bathsheba Sherman, who had lived there in the early 19th century. Now, how did they figure this out? Did Lorraine figure this out because she is psychic? No, she was told that by Carolyn, and then probably thought, yeah, fuck it, that's good enough. Put that in the book. Now, according to usghostadventures.com, no relation to Zach Ballbag and stupid TV show that Andrea Perron said was a disgrace. Quote, Carolyn told them Bathsheba had lived in the farmhouse in the 1800s. She killed an infant, possibly her own, with a knitting needle by impaling its skull. Moses! But then Bathsheba was acquitted at trial due to a lack of evidence. So historical records can prove that. Now, would it surprise you that the Warrens write-up says something completely different? The Warrens write-up says that Bathsheba was rumored to have been a Satanist and there was evidence that she had been involved in the death of a neighbor's child, though no trial ever took place. That is literally the complete opposite of what the historical documents say. But, yeah. Anyway, this fictionalized version of Bathsheba also allegedly beat and starved her farmhands for years. Eventually, after drowning one of her children in the farmhouse's basement well, she hung herself in the attic. The locals believed that Bathsheba was a witch who practiced the dark arts and worshipped the devil. So from then on, the presence haunting the Perrin home was referred to as Bathsheba by Lorraine and all of those associated with the haunting. As described in one of Andrea Perrin's books, Carolyn experienced a sudden piercing pain in her calf while lying on the sofa, and upon inspection, a perfectly circular wound was found, as if a large sewing needle had punctured her skin. Lorraine suggested that the suspected witch could have taken the needle with her to the afterlife and used it to harm Carolyn. Because knitting needles have souls, I guess. Allegedly, the Warrens guided the parents through a seance to help them communicate with whatever malicious entity was targeting Carolyn. Now, during this seance, Carolyn became possessed. She was speaking in tongues, and she rose from the ground in her chair. According to Andrea, quote, "My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice not her own. Her chair levitated, and she was thrown across the room," end quote. So what you're saying is that didn't only happen in the movie, that happened in real life as well. Okay. Now, Andrea said that she was secretly watching the seance, and as the story goes, after this chair thing happened, Roger called the Warrens, quote, "a pair of two-bit charlatans," and Roger told them to fuck off. Now, what I am confused about is why Roger called them charlatans when a chair literally levitated and flew across the fucking room. Because that is exactly the type of shit that I would need to see with my own eyes to convince me that ghosts and demons and shit are real. However, even Roger still thought that they were frauds. According, of course, to skeptic Joe Nickel, who may or may not have had to have his head stapled shut again. We're not sure. However, would it surprise you to know that the Warrens website words this whole thing slightly differently? They say that Roger kicked the Warrens out because he was worried about his wife's mental stability. What about her physical stability? Surely that would hurt, being thrown across the room while you're strapped into a chair? Well, what the fuck do I know? Anyway, according to Andrea Perrin again, the family continued to live in the farmhouse due to financial instability until they were able to move in 1980, at which point the spirits were silenced and the haunting ceased. For no reason in particular, I guess. Now, most of what the public knows about the story comes from what the Warrens said, and by extension, how the Conjuring movie presents it. However, there's also Andrea Perrin's 3-volume book series about this story, and I have nothing against the Perrin family. In fact, I sympathize with them, because we know what Ed Warren thought about all of these families. He thought that they were all crazy, and then they would use whatever trauma the family believed they were going through into tricking them into believing that they were now possessed or haunted by demons. And then they would tell them, hey, if you sign this contract, you'll become rich. And then they would screw them over. And that's terrible. However, in this story, the Warrens also completely screwed over Bathsheba Sherman, who actually was a real person. She was a real woman who was not a Satanist, who was not a witch, who was not a child murderer, and who was not a demon. She was just a normal woman who lived a normal life and had no normal children of her own. Well, fuck it, when you put it that way, it sounds pretty bad. She had no children at all, is what I mean. Now, according to US Ghost Adventures, no relation to Zach Ballbaggins, quote, based on facts, she appears to have lived a fairly average life of a hard-working farmer's wife. Contrary to internet rumors and local legends, there is no evidence to support that her body literally turned to stone. Bathsheba also never lived at the Perrin farmhouse, but on the Sherman farm some distance away. Oh, sorry, does that debunk your entire Conjuring Perrin family haunting story? My bad. Now, Bathsheba also did not get hung, nor did she hang herself. She died of sudden paralysis at the age of 73. Sudden paralysis is old-timey talk for a stroke. Now, sadly, the Conjuring movie smeared her memory with unfounded accusations. Her grave and headstone have been targeted by vandals for years, And this fucking movie is to blame. By the way, if you haven't watched my spontaneous human combustion video yet, it's pretty fire, you should really check it out, but I mentioned a guy named Joe Nickell in that video. Joe was an American skeptic, paranormal researcher, and general debunker of bullshit. And he shared his interpretation of the whole Perron family haunting story in a 2016 article saying, quote, "I analyzed the parents' claims of demonic activity and showed that they were consistent with the effects of strong winds, misperceptions, schoolgirl pranks, vivid dreams, simple suggestion, role-playing, and other factors, including one child's having had an imaginary playmate, and the effects of memory after 30 or 40 years." Now, Joe Nickell said that the Warrens' involvement alone hurt the story's overall credibility. Joe went on to say as well that while looking deeper into the story that the family claimed happened, he discovered, quote, "Unlike the happy, tranquil family described in the books, they were a dysfunctional mess with Carolyn and Roger on the verge of a separation that ended in divorce." Moses. This feels like it's none of my business. But I've put my fucking foot in it now, haven't I? Roger denounced the Warrens as a pair of two-bit charlatans, and Carolyn insisted that her daughters agree the house was haunted as a show of loyalty. Furthermore, Nickell said that Bathsheba's suicide in the farmhouse attic is just one of the many deaths wrongly attributed to the property. Other deaths that Carolyn uncovered happened in different locations. There is no record of anyone purposely killing an infant in the 300-year history of the property. Had any such death occurred, it would have likely been recorded in what is known as the Black Book of Burrillville, a list of unusual deaths from 1806 compiled by historians in the township of Burrillville, where the farmhouse officially sits. End quote. Now, the reason I think we can safely conclude that the Conjuring house is not haunted at all is the fact that it is only haunted sometimes, pretty much just depending on who's living in it. Now, after the parents moved out in 1980, Jerry and Norma Sutcliffe purchased the farmhouse and moved in, and they lived there for 32 years. Take a guess, how many strange and or paranormal incidents do you think they reported? Zero, zip, nada, niet. What a wonderful place to live. But they had to sell this house because of this fucking movie. Vandals and trespassers kept coming by and invading their privacy on their way to destroying Bathsheba's tombstone. And this is the same problem that the Amityville homeowners experience as well, because paranormal investigation is such an innocent, fun hobby. Now, Jerry and Norma had to sell this house, and they sold it to some people for $439,000. This new family moved in, and they must have been artists like Ed Warren as well, because they would very quickly start saying that a whole lot of demonic shit is going on here, and this place is haunted as a motherfuck, despite literally nothing happening for 32 years. It's speculated that they made all of these claims to ramp up the excitement about the Conjuring house once again, so that they could sell the Conjuring house for a major profit. And they did. They did sell it for a major profit. They sold it for $1.5 million. Yeah. Fair play. After that, the Conjuring house became like an attraction or a B&B or something, and had these two hosts that said that they could talk to the dead. But then everyone exposed how they did the stupid toe-clicking trick, and now the Conjuring house is permanently closed, and people like Jason Hawes is trying to raise money to buy it or something. I don't know. Couldn't really give a fuck, to be honest. Andrea Perron has since changed her mind about Bathsheba being the thing that haunted them to UFOs. UFOs. She apparently remembers being 7 years old, looking up to the sky and thinking, oh, that's a weird cloud. And now she does a bunch of UFO talks and gets angry at people who are disrespectful to the Conjuring house. Oh no, I better watch out. She also claims that only about 5% of the real events were portrayed in the Conjuring movie, because the other 95% was too extreme and the studio wanted an R rating so kids could come watch it with their parents. Okay, whatever. Next up is Amityville. And this one sucks because the backstory is very real and very tragic. But the fact that the Warrens used this as inspiration to make up a story saying a demon caused this guy to kill his family is fucking pathetic. At around 3 o'clock in the morning on November 13th, 1974, a dickhead named Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed his entire family inside their home in Amityville, New York. Then later that same day at about 6:30 p.m., Ronald, who also went by the nickname Butch, walked into a bar and shouted something like, quote, "You gotta help me, I think my mother and father are shot," end quote. Butch then takes a group of people from the bar back to his house, and they confirm that not only his mum and dad were shot, but also his entire family was shot and killed, including his 2 brothers and his 2 sisters. All 6 of his family members were lying face down on their beds with a gunshot wound to the back of their head. The whole thing here looked a bit suspicious, so Butch was taken in for questioning, and allegedly, he asked one of the cops when he could collect his father's life insurance money, and they were like, "Hold on just a goddamn fucking minute here, we gotta figure out what happened first." So Butch told the cops that a mob hitman named Louis Fellini had killed his family. The cops then went and spoke with Fellini, who had an alibi. So they went back to Butch and they were like, "Listen here, dingbat, the jig is up, Fellini and Moose were out of town whacking some other mark. What do you gotta say about that?" And Butch quickly caved and admitted that he had drugged and shot his whole family with a rifle. He told them, quote, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." He admitted that he had taken a bath and changed his clothes, and he detailed where he discarded crucial evidence such as bloodstained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges before going to work as usual. Now, to be fair, the weirdest thing about the story is that no drugs or sedatives were detected in the toxicology tests. However, before we start speculating that Bitch had help from Lulu, Lucifer, the King of Hell, or the Metallica Lou Reed album, doesn't matter, both are pure evil and the actual devil in my opinion. What a niche joke. But it's important to mention that Bitch murdered his entire family at around 3 a.m. and went to the bar 15.5 hours later. I haven't been able to find anywhere online what exactly he was supposed to have drugged them with. Perhaps he didn't say, but according to the Recovery Village, it's a website, some sedatives or sleeping aids do have a very short half-life and will be out of your system within just 16 hours. Some can apparently leave your system in as little as 3 hours. Point is, saying that we don't know how he did it, therefore he was possessed by Lulu, is a bit of a leap. Especially when there are sedatives out there that would be gone by the time people inspected the family's remains. Anyway, moving along. Now, Bitch would also do his best Ed Warren impression his whole life and changed his story every time he told it. At one point, he even said that his sister Dawn was in on the murder spree because he believed that their parents were planning on killing him. He tried to use the fact that the police found some unburned gunpowder on her dress as proof of her involvement, but experts stated that that doesn't mean that she shot her gun. What it means is that she was close to the muzzle of a gun when it was fired, which makes sense because she was shot. Moving on. At the trial, Bitch's defense lawyer William Weber, a name that you want to remember, William Weber made an insanity plea, claiming that Bitch was hearing voices and had no memory of the murders. However, the psychiatrist for the prosecution made it clear that although Bitch was a user of heroin, LSD, and had an antisocial personality disorder, he was definitely aware of his actions at the time of the crime. The judge then said Bitch's crimes were, quote, "the most heinous murders committed in Suffolk County since its founding." He then gave Bitch 6 sentences of 25 to life. Good riddance. Now the next thing that happens is George and Kathy Lutz come along and they buy this house. Now I don't know if this is important, but they 100% definitively knew about the tragedy that had occurred there. The realtor that sold them the property told them about it, even though realtors in New York do not need to disclose to buyers that a murder had occurred in that property. But even if the realtor didn't tell them, this story was big news, so the Lutz family almost certainly heard or read about it, and they moved in anyway. Now, I'm gonna jump the gun here a bit because in my opinion, the rest of the story is a lot funnier when you know this. William Weber, Bitch's defense lawyer, openly admitted that he, the Lutzes, and the book writer Jay Anson had, quote, invented the horror story over many bottles of wine to make lots and lots of money with book and movie deals. With his intimate knowledge of DeFeo's crimes, he could give them extra information that was not public knowledge, making the book a little more believable. Now, why did William Weber admit all of this? Well, because the Lutz family fucked him on the deal. Apparently, they made over $300,000 from this story and from giving the rights to the 9,000 Amityville movies that have been made. But the lawyer, he didn't get that much. That annoyed him. So he told the truth. Now that we know that, what hot garbage did the Warrens write? Let's take a look at their case file. On December 18th, 1975, the Lutz family moved into the DeFeo home. Though it had only been 13 months since the DeFeo murders had occurred, George and Kathleen Lutz thought the Dutch Colonial was a lovely home and a steal at $80,000, never expecting that they'd have to leave it all behind 28 days later. A Catholic priest arrived while the Lutz family was unpacking to bless the family home. As the priest made his way upstairs to the second floor, entering the bedroom, which had formerly belonged to Mark and John DeFeo, he began sprinkling holy water, at which point an unseen voice told the priest, quote, "Get out," which he hastily did. Why is a priest so scared of demons when they are literally the best equipped people in the fucking world to deal with them? I don't know. Any more questions? Yes, what is the name of this priest? No idea. Father fuck knows. Now this priest also failed to tell the Lutz family about the voice he heard, because why would he do that? But he did warn them, quote, "Do not use the upstairs room as a bedroom, and do not let anyone sleep in there." Now, why would he say that instead of saying, "Hey, I heard a voice that said get out of the house"? And since I'm a priest and I know stuff about demons, it's a demon. Who knows? Now, although ominous, the warning of course by the priest, the Lutz family abided by the words of the priest and turned the room into a sewing room for their friend Bathsheba Sherman. From the very first night they moved in, the family claimed that they felt strange sensations. Within days, the family's personality had drastically changed and arguments ensued. And Tony, please, learn how to write, man. What the fuck sentence is this? George was plagued by a constant chill and spent all his time feeding the fireplace. George also noticed a change in his grooming. Tony, where the fuck did you learn how to write? George also noticed a change in his grooming habits, and his and Kathy's health declined drastically. Where did I learn to speak? The Lutz's daughter began spending all her time in a room playing with an imaginary friend she described as red-eyed pig called Jody. Tony, were you drunk when you wrote this article? What the fuck is going on, man? He clearly didn't care when he wrote this because he knows it's bullshit. Okay, let's try again. The daughter makes an imaginary friend and she describes this friend as a red-eyed pig called Jody. And Jody had the power to transform not only in shape, but in size. And sometimes Jody could become larger than the house. Amazing! So naturally, if it's bigger than the house, it would have to be outside then. So then why did nobody else see it? Well, because the red-eyed pig Jody claimed that she could only be seen if she wanted to. So then why didn't Jody want people to see her? Why didn't Jody just get really fucking big like Godzilla and go crush everyone in New York? What exactly are these demons even trying to do on Earth? Annabelle is clearly trying to kill people, driving them off the road into trees and shit. Bathsheba doesn't like moms. And Jody just wants to be a big red-eyed pig. There doesn't seem to be a common goal here. Does Lulu not want to take Earth and corrupt people? If Jody could just go full kaiju and kill everyone, what's Lulu waiting for? Doesn't he want more fucking souls in hell or something? I don't know why I'm thinking about this so much. It doesn't make fucking sense to me. Okay, let's get back on track. Back inside the Amityville house, mysterious foul odors would emanate from different locations. Black stains appeared on the toilets and ceramic fixtures. Kathy was touched by an unseen force and a green gelatin substance would appear throughout the house. Hundreds of flies appeared in the sewing room, despite it being the dead of winter. George would wake up every night at 3:15 in the morning, which coincided with the time the police felt the DeFeo family was murdered. George also awoke one night to witness his wife transform into a 90-year-old hag, and the next night she began levitating over the bed. It's a bit rude. Are all 90-year-olds hags, George? The Lutz family tried several times to contact the Catholic priest, only to find that the phones would cut out whenever they tried to call him. And after failing to get the priest to return, the family took matters into their own hands. Armed with a crucifix, they walked throughout the house reciting the Lord's Prayer. A chorus of voices erupted in response, asking them, quote, "Will you stop?" Now, the final night the Lutzes were in the house was reported to be the worst. There was banging and rappings as loud as a marching band emanating throughout the house. Furniture was being moved by its own accord, and the children were being terrorized. After 28 days in the DeFeo home, the family claimed that they could take no more. They grabbed only a few belongings and fled the house. taking shelter at Kathy Lutz's mother's home in nearby Babylon. Now that was all completely 100% fake, as we already know. The story was invented and fabricated and made up by several bottles of wine accompanied by a few crazy people. Now, let's get to the fun part, the completely batshit crazy Warrens investigation. Oh boy. 20 days after the Lutzes fled, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine were called in by Marvin Scott, a news reporter with Channel 5 who covered the Amityville story and worked on a prior investigation with the Warrens. Very soon after that, a team of reporters, investigators, and parapsychologists were assembled by Ed Warren, and they all went out to meet him by the Amityville house. At this point in time, about 3 weeks after the Lutz family left the house, they were still refusing to re-enter the home during this investigation. Then, at some point, Lorraine Warren told a reporter for the Express Times newspaper that the Amityville haunting was not a hoax, and that the Amityville house was not just another haunted house, and was one of the most horrific cases that they had ever investigated. According to Lorraine, the house was occupied by evil and the personification of evil. Was it Ed's presence that she was just detecting inside the house? Probably. She also would tell Marvin Scott, quote, "Marvin, this is the closest to hell I ever want to get." How bad could it be though when Lulu is not even ordering his red-eyed pig Jody to go supersize and crush New York? I mean, it seems like Lulu's just chilling. I imagine in our universe that Lulu is currently a version of Mark Shepard's Crowley from Supernatural.
This is hell.
Yeah. See, problem with the old place was most of the inmates were masochists already. A lot of, "Thank you, sir, can I have another hot spike up the Jacksy?" But just look at them.
Next.
No one likes waiting in line.
What happens when they reach the front?
Nothing. They go right back to the end again.
He's not a complete dickhead. He's a cunt, but he's not a complete cunt. Maybe that explains Jody. Yeah, irrelevant. During the Warrens' investigation of the Amityville house, Ed was physically pushed to the floor. But by what, Ed? We know this house is not haunted. We know the story is fake. What were you pushed to the floor by? The wind? And that's not all. Lorraine was also overwhelmed by the sense of a demonic presence and was plagued by her psychic impressions of the DeFeo family bodies laid along the floor covered in white sheets. And she would also experience this sense of physically being pushed by the wind. Now, according to the Warrens' stupid website, the Warrens also captured an image of a spirit that appeared as a little boy peering from the second floor. Lorraine claims that no one was in the house at the time this photo was taken. However, Paul Bartz admitted that he actually was in the house. Who is Paul Bartz, you ask? This is Paul Bartz. Now, of course, there was a real tragedy that occurred in this house. Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 people. He murdered his entire family. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the evil thing in the house. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the problem. But an even bigger problem for all the people peddling this bullshit story was that Ronald DeFeo Jr. was still alive at this time. So they couldn't exactly blame him or his spirit or his ghost for all the weird shit that was not happening inside this house. So they needed somebody else to blame for all the non-existent demonic activity. And this time, they picked a guy named John Catcham. Now, this little bit of lore was invented and made up, of course, by the lawyer William Weber, the Lutzes, and the guy that wrote the book, Jay Anson. However, it's in the Warrens' best interest, obviously, to corroborate the story and back it up, which they do on their write-up on their website. Now, the claim is that the land used to belong to a guy named John Catcham, a practicing black magician who had a cottage on the land prior to the construction of the Amityville house in 1924. The Amityville book also claims that John Catcham was a witch and was involved with the whole Salem witch trials thing. And the book also claims, and this is the best part, that John Catcham requested that his remains be buried on that property, on the Amityville property, and his remains remain there till this day. The thing is, we know that this claim is total fucking bullshit. And we know that it's total fucking bullshit because this claim was made by Jay Anson, the guy who wrote the fictional Amityville book over a couple of bottles of wine with the previous owner and the lawyer. But just for fun, let's look into it a bit more. They say that John Catcham's body is somewhere in the northeast corner of the property. Okay, now there's a couple of things to consider about this claim. If there was a body buried on this property, witch or demon or otherwise, in order for Jay Anson to conclusively say this, he would have needed to find records or documents proving this. But these sources do not exist. There is no records or documents proving that there is a body buried on this property. Yet people like the Warrens will still spread this bullshit as truth and, quote, believe these energies directly impacted the lives of both the DeFeos and the Lutzes. What energies? And it's funny because as soon as people start pointing out these critical fucking errors in their stories, this guy starts acting like a child.
I've not met a house that I thought was haunted. I think the Warrens have never met a house that they didn't think was haunted.
I think that you are mistaken.
I was
know
on the
that
show
we
with
have
this man
the
once before.
Wait a
It's
minute.
my turn.
You made a statement.
I've heard that you were a
You have a
loudmouth who
statement.
shouted people down. Just give me my chance
No,
to
I
talk.
won't give you a chance.
You did that to me last show we
say
were
a bunch
on.
of lies.
Joe,
We
I'll
have
give
the
you your
evidence, We have the
chance.
proof.
You're a loudmouth, Warren, and
No,
we
you're
all
the
know, we all
loudmouth.
know it. But if you'll just let me finish,
When you're concerned, I'm a loudmouth.
Go ahead, Joe.
try to
haven't
show
even heard
try to
nothing.
show a little
Joe,
class.
I
You're on
don't have a
national
lot of
TV.
time.
No, I'm not going to
Just-
give class to somebody who's
Ed,
sitting here.
let
You'll
Joe,
have
nothing but lying.
Ed, let Joe just explain.
Be careful who you
point
call
by
a
point.
liar.
Well, what would
Go
you
ahead.
do about it?
Guys, Joe, point by point.
Yes, one thing that the houses that sincere people report that they think are haunted usually follow certain patterns. This is a hodgepodge of the sort of ghost tale, poltergeist, part demon, part
you
this,
there?
part that.
Were you there?
We saw a similar pattern with the Amityville Horror, a case that the Warrens thought was genuine.
We didn't
It
think,
turned
we knew.
out to be a blatant
Nobody
hoax
ever proved that.
concocted over
Nobody
several
ever
bottles
proved
of
it.
wine.
Can
The
you
evidence,
prove it?
yes, I
No,
can
you
prove
can't.
it. Yes,
You
I
cannot
can.
prove
It's
it.
been proven.
No, it has never
The
been
evidence
proven.
is very clear in the case of the Amityville Horror.
No,
And the whole
no way.
packaging of this story, the book
Packaging.
says it's for Halloween release. The book was written by a professional fiction writer who writes horror stories.
Joe,
This
does the
whole
church-
packaging is a
does the-
crock.
Joe, does the church admit to exorcism?
He's an atheist. How would he know?
According to a newspaper article that I have, the Bridgeport newspaper, the diocese refuses to confirm that they had any exorcism there.
It wasn't
if there
done by
was,
the
if
operative
there
Sally,
was
I
an
have a
exorcism,
tape of
I
an
don't understand
exorcism
why
from a
there is
priest.
any reason why they can't
wasn't
come out
done
and
for
say so.
Bridgeport.
We've
I don't
had
understand
priests
the
on
need
the
for
show when
secrecy.
we've talked about exorcism.
If I
Take a
can
break.
prove
We'll
that
be
there
right
wasn't exorcism,
If I can prove that there wasn't exorcism, if I can prove that there wasn't exorcism.
And again, he says he has the proof. Where the fuck is it, Ed? Well, you know what? We're never gonna see it, so how about we just look at the proof that there is no body buried on this property? According to skeptic.com, quote, such specifics about a body being buried on the property could only come from three sources: deeds, probate records, or diaries, or other handwritten documents. Probate records would delineate property boundaries in detail, as would deeds, but probate materials would speak little of grave markers or burials. Diaries also would not likely give precise locations of grave sites, other than intimate within an existing cemetery. The northeast corner of the DeFeo Lutz property seems unlikely, because a burial close to the river, eastern edge of this property would be close to the river, would be disturbed by flooding. And anything west of the easternmost strip would have been disturbed by construction. The in-ground swimming pool is located between the river and the rear of the house, end quote. So basically what's being said here is there's no document saying, oh, there's a body buried here, and if there was a body buried here, somebody would have found it or the river would have taken it. Therefore, there is almost certainly not a body buried here. However, the best part is, even if there is a body buried here, it's almost certainly not John Catcham. Because Jay Anson claims in the book that the Catcham family lived in Salem. He then, to make this book more believable I suppose, sources this information. But when you check his source, Peter Venturini, Peter clearly states that this family, the Catcham family, lived in Lynn, Massachusetts. And Lynn is located east of Salem Village, which I believe is now currently known as Danvers, and Lynn is further east of Salem as well. Now back to the Warrens case file. Quote, the Shinnecock Indians also at one time had an enclosure on this land that was used to house the sick and the mad. Those in this enclosure were left to die. The Warrens believed that the suffering there had left the property with a very negative energy and a dark history. Such a negative history was a magnet for the demonic spirits and the preternatural. Okay, back to skeptic.com. Quote, Shinnecock Indians lived a good 50 miles away from Amityville. Do you remember that web series called Mortal Kombat Legacy?
You're good. I'll make this look easy. You do make this look easy.
Yeah, man, the Warrens are making this easy. At the end of the day, guys, most people accept that Amityville was a hoax to make money. So it's kind of funny to know that the Lutz family actually made a loss on the sale of the house. But they did make like $300,000 from their story, I guess. But they bought this house for $80,000 in 1975, and they sold it for $55,000 in 1977. So maybe this one time, all press was not actually good press and affected the price of the house. However, this is where things get hilarious again, because the new owners, James and Barbara Cromartie, moved into the Amityville house and they lived there for 10 years. Take a guess! How many weird things do you think happened to them? Let me give you a hint. It's a nice round number. A round number with a hole in the middle. Fucking 0! Apparently, the new owners, James and Barbara, traveled around the country and spoke out on how the Lutz family hoaxed the whole thing. But of course, with this house being so fucking famous, with 9,000 movies made about it, their privacy was constantly being invaded. So they moved out. And since they moved out, several other families have owned and lived in the Amityville house as well, and have never reported anything strange. So maybe Patrick Wilson was right then. When you get haunted, it's like stepping in gum. Leaving the house doesn't really help because you're just going to take the demon with you. So the big question on my mind is, did the Lutz family report anything unusual after moving out of the Amityville house and into another one? No. So where the fuck did Jody go? Because Jody was not in the Amityville house after the Lutzes moved out, let me tell you that. Anyway, now Marvin Scott, that TV news reporter for Channel 5 that called the Warrens in the first place to investigate this house, started corresponding with Ronald DeFeo Jr. himself while DeFeo was in prison. And according to Marvin, at one point, Bitch wrote back, quote, "There was no insanity. Only people talking to William Webb about books, about movies, and about me being possessed." And he also wrote, "There was no demon. You know who the demon is. I am the demon." End quote. Now, whether or not this was him finally taking responsibility for his actions is unclear because he changed his story every day. But fuck him and fuck the completely debunked Amityville house and all 9,000 movies about it. Alright, last one for today is the Enfield haunting, and this one's my favorite because of these 6 seconds of absolute cinema.
How does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?
It's not haunted.
Shut up, shut up, shut up.
Well then. Now, in case you're not a horror nerd like me, this is Janet Hodgson herself saying that the house is not haunted.
It's not haunted. Shut up.
Janet Hodgson, by the way, is the girl responsible for this entire story. I think that proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that nothing happened here. But I'll tell you the story anyway so that we can laugh at it. Now, in August 1977, single mother Peggy Hodgson called the Metro Police to her home in Enfield, London. This initial call only mentioned her daughter's complaints of knocking sounds. So a police officer was sent out to investigate and reported witnessing a chair, quote, wobble and slide, but, quote, could not determine the cause of the movement. Now, people have taken that to mean that a ghost moved it. To each their own. I believe it was Shia LaBeouf, but it was most likely just a prank perpetrated by the girls. And we come to this conclusion based on all the other shit that the girls did as well. Or were at least caught doing. But we'll get there soon. Now anyway, the ghostly sorta incidents are said to have escalated over the next 18 months, which led to more police reports from Peggy, her neighbors, and eventually even paranormal investigators. Even the paranormal investigators were like, holy fucking hell, we need the police. Now I know this is beside the point, but doesn't it piss you off when you watch shit like Nuke's Top 5, for example, and you watch these stupid paranormal investigators go into a house looking for ghosts, and when they kinda think they may have seen one, they shit themselves and they run out of the house and they never return. The fuck were you doing there in the first place? Weren't you looking for ghosts? Why don't you run up and fucking record one? Because it's all fake, I suppose. That's probably why. Now, I've mentioned in previous videos that paranormal investigators are almost always full of shit and cannot be taken seriously. And this case, this Enfield case, is a prime example of why. Over this 18-month period, more than 30 people said that they saw heavy furniture flying around the fucking house like it's Hogwarts, yet they took 0 photographs of this and they didn't even bother to video record it either. They also saw objects being thrown across the room and the sisters seeming to levitate several feet off the ground. Levitate, you say? Does this look like this girl is levitating, or does it look like she's just jumping off the bed? Does it look like the girl in the background even gives a fuck that Lulu has just picked her sister up and is about to eat her soul? Well, I'll be honest, I can't see levitation or even demon infestation in these photos, but what I can clearly see is the bedding changing in every photo, which leads me to believe that she is obviously jumping off the bed in every photograph. Now, Janet was also caught bending spoons and attempting to bend an iron bar. Janet was also caught smashing a broom into the ceiling to make banging noises and hit one of the investigators' tape recorders. And she did this because this is a very real haunting, I suppose. Now, some people say that the most bizarre part of this case is the voice of a seemingly grizzled senior citizen named Bill coming out of this 11-year-old girl. And it is bizarre, but you know what else is very bizarre? It was noted that this Bill character had a peculiar habit of suddenly changing the topic, a habit that Janet herself also had.
Shall we try and speak to him? No. We'll see if he'll speak to us.
Yeah.
Is anybody there?
No.
Who's there?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who?
Goose chasers here.
However, even more bizarre than that is one of Janet's hobbies was ventriloquism. She was good at throwing her voice and changing her voice, because that is something that is actually quite possible to do. Anyway, in 1978, these two parasites latched onto the latest and hottest paranormal story and made their way to Enfield. Now, while the movies make these two look like caring, loving heroes, in actuality, these two fucking people just showed up uninvited. The family had no idea who these two weirdos were, and they actually told the Warrens to fuck off. The Warrens were only there for 4 hours, and in this very brief 4 hours, the Warrens were not only sure that this was all very real, but they were sure that they knew what was haunting this family. It wasn't a poltergeist, it was a demon. And the Enfield haunting became one of their most famous cases of demonic possession, despite them being in the house for a shorter amount of time than my 5-episode series on Jack the Ripper. Interestingly, the case file on this story is absent from their own website. I wonder why. Well, whatever, as one final little kapow here to the story, Janet Hodgson herself would later admit again that this was all a prank, and that her and her sister faked, quote, about 2% of the incidents. Fair enough, 2%, I'll take it. It's the most honest anyone has been in this video, except for William Weber. However, let me ask you this then. If ghosts were real, and you pulled out a Ouija board and you contacted O.J. Simpson, and you said, hey, O.J., did you kill Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman? And O.J. said, well, I only inflicted about 2% of their injuries that night. Would you believe him? The point is,
you've now just confirmed in my mind you're not trustworthy, so fuck you.
Anyway, ladies and gents, I'm going to call it here, and I will see you again tomorrow for part 3. Thanks for watching.